Hello, we are your public policy team here at the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. I'm Catherine Grinberg, Executive Vice President here at the Chamber, and this is Cale Dunwoody, Director of Public Policy. We today are excited that now that the North Dakota Legislative 68th Assembly is over, we're going to give a little bit of a recap on what happened. Cale's going to take us through some of the key legislation, some that we were tracking, some that's just overall legislation, but dig a little bit into a few of the different topic areas so that everyone can be on the same page of what the outcomes were. We'll be doing a few other wrap-up kinds of events and articles, those sorts of things for you to dig deeper into them. But as the assembly just wrapped up on April 30th, bright and early in the morning, am I right?
Yes,
It was
Yep.
a good 2 a.m. or something?
Yeah, almost 3 a.m., yep.
So it was a late one, but they got it finished.
Yes.
So let's start kind of at the beginning, Cale, with one of the proposals that when we went in, we saw a couple different ones coming from, and that was taxes.
Yeah.
So there's property tax relief on the table, income tax relief, few different proposals as we came into it. Where did we end up at the end of session?
Yeah, no, I think when we look at the income tax proposal, that was kind of primarily supported by the House of Representatives and the governor, whereas the property tax and homestead tax credit was primarily supported by the Senate. And so when we were kind of going through session, each proposal was kind of tracking through the legislative session. And then at the end, they really put it together for a comprehensive bill that included all three. And so we were watching as the legislative session kind of negotiated on what the right balance was between property tax, income tax, and homestead tax credit. And ultimately, the legislature decided to reduce income taxes from 5 brackets down to 3. Do a property tax credit of $500 for individuals' primary residence, as well as a homestead tax credit expansion for individuals that are 65 and older. So kind of a little bit of everything mixed together in that final proposal. And so that passed both bodies and has been signed by the governor. So and that's kind of a summary of the income, property tax, and homestead tax credit. So.
Awesome, thank you. Lots of numbers there, but lots of important information. And as I said, when we went in, we weren't sure if we'd come out with just an income tax bill, if it would just be property tax. So saw a little bit of everything all on that comprehensive end. Before we jump off of taxes, one other important tax a conversation that was going on is the automation tax credit. And I understand we expanded that a bit. That was something that we worked on with some of our legislators. Can you talk a little bit about what that expansion was and what that end number ended up being?
Yeah, so the automation tax credit is basically a income tax credit for industries that automate a task utilizing some kind of equipment. So a lot of manufacturers use these, and so what this is that it's a tax credit that is now for both automation and for the automation of animal agriculture. And so that was a huge addition to this legislative session. They decided to tack on that animal agriculture, and so with that expansion of the scope of the program, required some additional money to be in there. And so the legislature now has put in $3 million per year, which is a $6 million over the biennium for this automation tax credit. So individuals in the manufacturing industry and throughout North Dakota can utilize this tax credit after they've purchased equipment and then kind of take that off their income taxes.
Yeah, and that's key for a lot of our manufacturers that we work with, and hearing about the automation of the industry and being able to have these tax credits is one of those business perks that we hear about in being a business-friendly state. So a very successful program that it was before, and now expanding on it will be great to see what we're able to do with it and the additional dollars that are behind it. So we could talk taxes all day, super fun topic, but is there anything else with taxes before I jump to the next topic, Cale?
No, I think just overall there's a handful of other tax cuts, specifically on income taxes, and so I just, as we kind of keep rolling out some more things, I just encourage folks watching to check out some more of our blog posts or publications to see kind of some more of those tax proposals.
Awesome, thank you. Well, to another big topic that was talked about this session, and I think that we all went in hoping that something would get done, but we didn't know what, was childcare. So something we hear a lot about. Our workforce depends on it. Individual families depend on it. It's something that, we have talked a lot about, the quality, the accessibility, the affordability, and how are we going to address all these different facets of childcare, right? It's not just dumping some money into it or something to fix the problem,
Yeah.
but how do we strategically address it? And this was one of those that we started getting halfway through the session. I remember we were talking about, is something going to get done? What will get done? There's a lot of different bills, moving parts, kind of trust the process mantra for part of it. But in the end, there was a pretty big comprehensive bill that got done. Credit to a lot of our legislators that worked on it, as well as some across the state. Won't drop names for fear of forgetting someone, but we were really happy that something got done. Can you tell everyone, obviously not all the details because it's quite a comprehensive package, but what got done? Where are we sitting now for childcare?
Yeah, so the originally the childcare proposal was tracking through the Department of Health and Human Services budget. Into the last couple weeks of the legislative session, the legislature decided to pull that funding out of the DHHS bill and place it in a standalone bill. And so that bill ended up being 1540, which was about a $65.6 million childcare appropriation, which included a handful of different appropriations. Specifically, I think there was the large appropriation was to the Child Care Assistance Program. There was some appropriation for the non-traditional hours childcare. So for kind of those workers on the third shift, there was some incentives for businesses, employer-led childcare programs, and then just a number of other things that really are comprehensive to childcare. And so when we look at the childcare proposals, the governor had about a $73 million childcare proposal walking into the legislative session. The House had a number of bills equaling to about $130 million in childcare, and we ended up in a little bit over $65.5 million in childcare. So a lot of these dollars are going to help with the affordability of childcare, but then there's also some that go towards helping workers get some training and a number of other things. And so that was a really important bill as we tracked through the legislative process. And it was just something that, something was going to happen, but it was a matter of what number. And the legislature was kind of waiting to figure out what their overall budget numbers were before they finalized a number, I think.
Yeah, I think back to the kind of buzzword that we had around this topic for a lot of session was multifaceted approach, right? And we needed to approach the situation, this crisis, you could say, with a lot of different angles. So it wasn't just on the workforce front, but it also wasn't just on the availability with the providers. So there's a lot of different pieces, and we saw that reflected in that final bill. With a lot of these issues, there's always more that can be done, right? So we get ready for in 2 years again to go back to the legislature and see which things worked, which things we can improve upon, and certainly there'll be more conversations about childcare, but we were at least glad to see that something happened like we were hoping, like you said, and pretty expansive at that. So kudos to the legislature on that one.
Yes, for sure.
But since we're talking about a lot of different approaches to one topic, we'll quickly go into workforce, since that's another one that had a multifaceted approach to it. So workforce, again, just like childcare, had been a topic of conversation for a lot of legislators, a lot of organizations, businesses across the state. The need for workforce and how we address workforce as a state. It's not only North Dakota that's having this discussion, we're having it on the Minnesota side during the legislative session as well, and then really all across the country what we're hearing, and I'm sure many of you are very well versed in is this workforce crisis and what we're seeing with the availability of workers, upskilling our workers, those sorts of things. So starting with workforce, this is a really big one. There's a lot going on here. We worked very hard on this one, so I know, Kil, you're very educated on this topic. Do you want to start with Department of Commerce budget, or what part of the workforce beast do you want to dive into first?
Yeah. Well, I think when you look at the legislative session, there's a number of bills that were relating to workforce, and I think it's really important to look at the legislature's dedication early on to workforce. For instance, the Senate set aside a whole committee for workforce development, which was a huge change, and so that was kind of showing their commitment. And the governor came out with a number of proposals on workforce prior to the legislative session in his State of the State address. And so when we look at the Department of Commerce budget, that's kind of one of the main vehicles for funding for all of these workforce programs and initiatives. And there's some in there that I'm going to specifically call out, but there's there's a number of different things that can be tied to workforce, and specifically one of the priorities that's kind of near and dear to our heart here at the Chamber is the Regional Workforce Impact Program, which allows a regionalized approach for workforce, whether it be attraction, development, retention, acclimation. And so that was kind of one of the big priorities that we were pushing for this legislative session. As that kind of came out, the governor recommended 20 million. It got bumped around a few times, and we ended up at 12.5 million. So a good chunk of change for regional workforce regional workforce dollars for North Dakotans and organizations across the state, as well as a workforce talent attraction program. That was another big ask by the legislature. The governor had recommended $24 million for that program, and once again, kind of got adjusted around and ended at about that $12 million end balance. And so when we're looking at that, that's a significant amount of money. But then in addition to that, there was a proposal for automation grants for both transitioning workers and also equipment. Those started off at about 15 million together and ended up being zeroed out at the end. So that was something we were watching very closely for our manufacturers and some of our businesses, because automation is going to be part of the way to kind of help us through this workforce crisis. And there was a number of other things within that commerce bill. But I think that there's also so many other bills that carried some workforce things. And so one really that we worked closely on was the Office of Legal Immigration. And so that was a proposal to establish an Office of Legal Immigration in the state of North Dakota. This would be the first time we've had an Office of Immigration within the last 100 years. And so what this really does is allow businesses to kind of have a centralized location to help them navigate the waters of immigration. I think it's very complicated, and not everybody has access to lawyers. And I think we've even seen in our region that there's a lack of access to immigration attorneys, just for the sake of we have so much of a need and not enough a supply of folks. And so this would kind of help kind of be that central spot for folks to go to. And really kind of navigate those waters. And it's got two full-time employees to kind of get this program off the ground, as well as has some kind of some guiding principles to make sure that it helps out the business community and make sure that we can help navigate this workforce crisis, as immigration is very pivotal to the success of workforce in addressing that issue. So
yeah, and there was a number of immigration bills kind of moving through the session. It was another one of those issues where we didn't know exactly where we'd land, but being able to have, like you said, those 2 FTEs dedicated to this and really navigating the waters, so we can let our businesses know which centralized location to go to and ask those questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get some direction and some answers so that they can implement processes and be able to get individuals into the workforce here and become acclimated to our communities, is something that we at the Chamber are very passionate about, but we know our businesses are passionate about too, and that's why we carried that one so hard and pushed for that through the legislature. So excited to see that. I know you talked a lot about the Department of Commerce bill, a lot of great things in there. One of those areas where you probably can't do enough for workforce right now just with the climate, so grateful for the investment that they put in. It ended up at a pretty good number, but again, like I said, with childcare, always more work to do, and so we can always put those dollars to good use. And I know we'll be excited to work with some of our partners on getting those dollars infused into the community and getting some outcomes that we can take back to the legislative session next year or in 2 years. So it'll be great. Anything else on workforce? I know, again, this is one that we could go on, and we can't get to all the provisions today, all the bills that went through. Quite a lengthy topic, I guess you could say, just because of how important it is. But anything else you want to add before we jump to education?
Yeah, I think one of the other ones that we really pushed on in favor of was Operation Intern, and that is a program that kind of helps folks get into internships across the state. And that was funded at a higher level than it was last biennium, and so we were just fighting to make sure that stayed at the level it was at, as well as try to get a little bit more funding, just because that program did close in such a short window. I think it was like 48 hours that had closed since it opened, and so we're just kind of because we know that that
Internships.
internships are going to keep people in our region, and a lot of people are going to take jobs through that company that they interned with, and so just making that more accessible for some folks in our region. So
well, perfect segue into education, right? As we talked about internship and students staying in our area, education went on as every session. There's always something with education to be watching and working on. We know that there was a higher education bill, some changes in there you'll discuss.
Yeah.
Career academies, obviously something that we know a lot about here on this side of the state and in our region, with the Cass County Career Innovation Center being built right now. So a lot going on in the Career Academy area, and another thing that we worked pretty hard on this session, so pretty proud of being able to have some outcomes there. And then cybersecurity, certainly there's an important bill there. So you want to touch a little bit maybe first on the higher education bill overall and where things ended up for our colleges and universities?
Yeah. And so when we're looking at the higher education bill, that's a very expansive bill that includes all 11 public institutions. But specifically for our region, we were looking at NDSU and NDSCS and making sure that one, we could they were able to implement a minimum amount payable, just because these institutions have seen declines in enrollment and need a little help kind of getting back on track. And so we were pushing for the legislature to kind of put that floor on the funding formula, so they couldn't drop below a certain amount, and that ended up being about 96%. Hold no harmless is what it's called, and so that was a key priority, as well as some capital projects. I think that's a huge thing for our institutions here in both Fargo and Wahpeton, just for the fact that we got to have kids are going to be going to these universities because of the facilities. Want to make sure that we give them the proper equipment and things like that, and that goes to the engineering facility at NDSU, and that's where folks have said that building is outdated and things like that. And if we want to recruit students to one of our cornerstones at NDSU, funding a facility that's well equipped to meet the needs of students for now and in the future, and so that was about an $84 million request from NDSU, as well as when you look at NDSCS, they had a request for an agricultural building in automation and autonomous systems. And that was about a $19 million ask. And so they were successful in getting some funding for those buildings and moving forward, which is great. Because like I said, students are going to really look at the facilities and put that into the determination of how when they're going to go to a college or university. So
yeah, the state-of-the-art facilities are very important, and we heard from a lot of our businesses of the students that come out of these programs in the colleges how important it is that they've worked with this equipment and they've seen it firsthand and had that experience. So really grateful that the legislature was able to find the dollars to support those couple. The other one we love, private-public partnerships, right, is the Challenge Grant.
Yeah.
There was funding put into that, so incentivizing some of that private dollars to be put in and then matching with some public dollars. So that was also a win that was put in there as well, right?
Yeah, that was about $20 million, and that really goes to the foundation's matching, like you were talking about, for academic achievement, for academic success. And so it's a really successful program, and we were happy to see that was funded at some level. Once again, wish it was a little bit higher. I think the governor had it a little bit higher than the 20 million, but I'm very thankful for the amount we received and our universities received.
Yeah, well put. Moving on to K through 12 a little bit, staying on education, but moving to a different side of education. Career academies. This was something we started session working on, and I think down to the last day we were working on at session. Started with that line of credit so that we could get some funds to be able to implement and start working on these career academies. Some funds that were supposed to be here previously and just didn't get them yet from Treasury for the federal side of things. So in the meantime, we're supplementing with a line of credit through the Bank of North Dakota. But let's talk a little bit about the inflationary dollars and the number that we ended up with to kind of fill that gap from not being able to start with that funding right away.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to kind of understand, where this challenge came from, and just to quickly kind of give a little bit of a synopsis of what happened was in the 2021 special session, the legislature appropriated about $88 million from federal funds for career academies and making sure that we had enough funding to build some of these career academies. It ended up being 13 career academies across the state of North Dakota. And so 68 million of that 88 million was held up in the U.S. Treasury and unfortunately, that holdup has caused some delays in these career academies being built, or even for ours, it's already being built, but it's kind of halting its phase, different phases of the process. And so, obviously, when we wait, a significant amount of time to receive funding, the inflationary inflation impacts that dramatically. And so, we saw a number of projects have significant asks for to kind of remedy that inflationary costs that they incurred during that period. And so what was happening was the Department of Career and Technical Education budget was kind of supposed to be the main avenue for this Career Academy funding, this inflationary funding. And so what happened was the House didn't have anything in their budget, and we said kind of we'll let the Senate put that in there. And so the Senate was debating, what is the right amount for inflation. Obviously, inflation's kind of subject to change just depending on where you're at and things like that. When you have 13 academies across the state of North Dakota, it can be, some of those can be different. And so they were looking at 20% and 30%, and they, kind of finally said 30% of that 88 million they originally appropriated would go to inflationary impact dollars for these programs. And so that was in the bill, and then it was kind of all about a funding source at the end of it. Is where are we going to find this fund? Is $26.5 million of funding, and there was some broadband funding that wasn't utilized or hasn't been utilized yet, and so the legislature had kind of identified that as a potential solution, so they weren't having to use general fund dollars or other state dollars. They could utilize these federal dollars. Well, unfortunately, there were some programs that were focusing on broadband that still haven't had access to that funding and still wanted another bite at that apple for funding. And so it was, there was kind of a debate about whether we should be using this funding for broadband or for career academies. And it's, kind of a touchy issue for some folks that are relying on this broadband funding. And so the legislature ultimately took out the broadband funding for CTE. And took that out of the career and technical education budget, passed the budget, and said we'll figure out what we're going to do with it after we get past this budget and kind of figure out where our numbers are at. So, at the very last bill to pass was the Office of Management and Budget bill, Senate Bill 2015, and that is kind of known as like a Christmas tree bill. They kind of put catch all the things that they missed throughout the legislative session into that bill, and one of those was the Career Academy, and so they were able to reinstate that $26.5 million of inflationary funding for our career academies across the state of North Dakota. And so it's really pivotal for us to get these off the ground, and this funding, even though it doesn't kind of meet the full demand that we wanted, it's still very much appreciated and very much needed to get these career academies across the finish line. So
yeah, thank you for that helpful explanation. I think that's important for everyone to realize kind of where we've been and how we got to this spot of this 26.5 and why it's so important that we have that 26.5 million. And now it'll be up to the different career academies to kind of look at that and see what the gap is and how we're going to be able to fund that gap. But thankful again, like you said, that the legislature was able to put some dollars there. And end of the day, I think it came down to that final hour, figuring out where we're going to get the funds for this and getting in that final bill. But glad to see that happen.
Yes.
Cybersecurity, as we talk about training and upskilling our next generation here, cybersecurity is so important in making sure that there's access for that education all across the state of North Dakota in all of our K-12 schools. So you want to talk just briefly about one of the bills that got done with that? Yeah,
so House Bill 1398, which was a kind of, a K-12 curriculum bill, for lack of better terms. And really what that was requiring school districts and schools to implement some kind of cybersecurity or computer science program in their curriculum, requiring students to take one of those classes before graduation. And so that really was, as we look at the future of workforce, whether they're going to be in a cybersecurity technology field or not, technology is going to play such a huge factor in that. We just want to make sure that we're educating students for the 21st century jobs, and that's all about technology. And so this is really an important bill as we look at the future of our state, and I think we're one of the first states to implement a policy like this, which is fascinating. And we got good support from the Department of Public Instruction and a number of private businesses in that kind of technology, cybersecurity realm. And so it was a huge win for our community and a huge win for the future of our state. So really excited to see where that goes.
So that wraps up education. That's a big one. Again, didn't get to all the different bills, but we could be here all day, all night, till 2 a.m. like the legislature,
yes.
right? But we'll move on for sake of time. Another big topic, especially for our region, water. So we've been talking about water through many legislative sessions, many committee hearings for a long time, and really the focus a lot of the time has been on the diversion. So too much water, being able to stop that water from the potential danger it could cause for our economy, our businesses, livelihoods here in the area. But this conversation was now flipped a little bit, right? The script has turned now that flood protection is in motion and we've got the diversion kind of underway happening. We need to talk about the opposite, which is getting water to our region. So just as much as floods can be really devastating for our area, so can droughts. So the Red River Valley Water Supply Project was another big priority for our region specifically. I know there was other water projects across the state, but for the sake of our viewership, do you want to just tell us a little bit about where that one ended up?
Yeah, so there's a kind of a comprehensive water budget. The Department of Water Resources budget kind of is a catch-all for all these water projects across the state. And so one of those important projects, as Catherine mentioned, was the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And that's really a pipeline of water coming from western North Dakota over to east and central North Dakota to make sure, as Catherine said, we have emergency supply of water if we're in that circumstance where we do not have enough. And so when we're looking at the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, a huge portion of that is state local as a state and local kind of match to get that project across on the funding side of things. And it was a very significant investment for the state of North Dakota this legislative session, and the intent to fund it for future legislative sessions, I think, is also kind of the caveat on that as well. Is they decided to fund the Red River Valley Water Supply Project at $180 million this biennium, but then also had a legislative intent to say that they wanted to keep funding this up to the $953 million over the next 10 years. So it's a huge investment from the state of North Dakota on this water project. And it was one of those things where we were pretty comfortable with where we're at, and the legislature gave us another $5 million this session, which was which every dollar, every penny counts to make sure that we can get this project across the finish line, because it's it's huge for our region and it's huge for our community here, specifically in the Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo area. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for those numbers too. I don't know how you keep all these numbers straight in your head. I need at least a cheat sheet for that, but all these millions of dollars here and there, right? But they all add up, balance the budget at the end of the day. Speaking of numbers, let's go to HB 1371, Agriculture Bill. Talk a little bit about what happened with, again, agriculture being a big backbone of our economy. A lot happened, but let's just touch on that one for now.
And this is a bill we were kind of tracking on the peripheral. It had a lot of support in both the Senate and the House. The governor was very supportive of this. And really what this bill was doing was modernizing our corporate agriculture, especially in the animal agriculture industry. And so kind of to go back to some of the remarks that Governor Burgum had said is that, we're seeing animal agriculture grow across our neighboring states. And we've actually seen a decline in some of our animal agriculture here in the state of North Dakota. And so what this bill does is just allow a little bit more ownership and a little bit more expansive corporations to take part in the corporate agriculture, the animal agriculture in our state. And so that was a huge priority for our agricultural folks. And it's, as agriculture is a backbone to our region, it's just important to mention that. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, 2 more topics if you're still hanging with us. We've got military and then the other bucket. So we'll end with that one. But as we look to military, something that's really near and dear to us here at the Chamber, knowing the importance of the economic impact, as well as that the military is really our local arsenal to fight against any dangers, threats that we have, such as the flood control that we just talked about, right? So as we look at military, there's a plethora of bills that went through, from military museums, base retention, tuition assistance. The income tax was a big one. So let's tackle military a little bit and share with our viewers what happened there.
Yeah, and specifically to some of the, the Adjutant General has his own budget, which had a number of different things in there, and he was working very hard to get that funded to the levels that he requested. And in that was a request for some funding for a military museum. Ultimately, the legislature just gave him the authority to raise funds, whether it be private or public federal funds. Where there was a request for about $20 million to match another $20 million to build this military museum. So that was something we were really focused on to just kind of help with the camaraderie of our military across the state, and as a recruitment tool for future military personnel. And then a couple other ones were tuition assistance. That was a huge one that we've been working on both in the state and federal levels, and specifically for this instance, the National Guard tuition assistance only applies to in-state institutions. So either the 11 public institutions that we have, and I believe that there is even maybe a little bit of a caveat for some private institutions within the state, but you can't go to MSUM and be a part of the North Dakota National Guard, the 119th Wing, and take a class over there and get credit for it, or get tuition assistance for it. And so really what this bill was doing is saying, no matter what institution you're taking a class from, whether it be online or out of state, you were able to receive that tuition assistance for your service in the National Guard, which is huge for a lot of the folks that are determining whether they want to enter the North Dakota National Guard or not. And so we were working with a number of folks, the Adjutant General's office, and some folks to get that across the finish line, and we were very, very happy to see where that ended up. So that was
about a recruitment tool, right?
Yes,
That's
yes.
awesome. Yeah. How about base retention? This is something
Yes.
that's also really big for our area with the 119th Happy Hooligans base here.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about where that ended up and why that funding stream is so important.
Yeah. So the early on, there's a number of there's kind of a coalition of folks. It was Fargo, Grand Forks, and Minot that came together and said, we really need to reinstate our state's importance, or reinstate the funding for our investment in our base retention grant program. And so really what that is funding to all three communities for them to maintain the missions that they have. And so we've obviously seen throughout our state's history, whether that be at Minot, Grand Forks, or Fargo, the missions have definitely changed. I mean, we've gone from the F-16s here at the Happy Hooligans to now the MQ-9s. And just making sure we can maintain those missions and move forward. And so our original ask to the state legislature was $1.9 million.
That's total, right?
That's total, all three
Okay.
communities, with a specific focus on Minot, because Minot has a mega project from the federal government, which would allow them to be one of the three communities for the nuclear part of the nuclear triad. And so re-outfitting all of the nuclear capabilities that they have, and it's a huge project, multi-billion-dollar project, and they are one of three, and they happen to be number 3 on that list. And so a significant portion of this was going to Minot so they could help them really kind of jump up on that list and make sure that they aren't underfunded or not funded at all. And so that was a huge priority for us. But for our community specifically, we received $250,000 to help with our military efforts, and that goes from a wide array of different things, from advocacy in both Washington D.C., as well as a number of community-based events and engagement opportunities, just to make sure that we have a community that supports our military, and making sure that we keep that message resonating through everybody.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. Thanks for going through those numbers as well. I think the importance of that base retention, you hit on it right away, was the advocacy piece, the recruitment, the awareness, all of that goes into that base retention program. And very awesome that we were so lockstep with our other communities of Minot and Grand Forks, and all coming together to realize the value of the military here in our great state. Also think it's important to note that we've got some local dollars that are put into that too. So the Chamber's proud to put some funds behind it. Minot and Grand Forks also have local dollars put behind it. So it's really great to see so many people coming together for military. And again, you see that public-private partnership, and that works so well to get a lot of these different things done. So that was great. Before we jump off military, let's talk income tax and military pay.
Yeah, so the state of North Dakota taxed parts of the military pay, and so there was a proposal to exempt military pay from income tax, and so basically what we've been seeing is folks that are in these border communities like Fargo and Grand Forks, actually that are in the military residing over on the Minnesota side because of the fact that they don't tax military pay on the Minnesota side of things. And so the state of North Dakota wanted to be competitive and wanted to make sure that we're retaining folks in our state. And so what this proposal would do would basically exempt military pay for active military, National Guard members, things like or folks like that, moving forward. So that was a substantial win for our military community and a win for the state of North Dakota as they're looking to attract and retain military folks here.
Yeah, some significant wins within military. So let's end with the other kind of bucket, and I do air quotes because there is a lot of other things that happened, and again, not going to touch to all of them, but some social issues that came up, economic issues that came up, a lot of different things across the state, some that got done, some that didn't. Let's walk through just very briefly, high level, what maybe some of those were that we saw during session and how they turned out.
Yeah, so the one I would, it's very important to kind of our community and our members is legacy fund investment. And that was a huge priority of the chambers back in the 2019 session, or the 2021 session, I should say. And that was House Bill 1425, which invested portion of the legacy fund earnings into specific assets, specific funds, and really there was a movement to kind of prune that back a little bit and make it not quite as expansive as the previous bill was. But in that bill included a lot of key priorities for our region. One of those being a revolving loan fund for infrastructure projects, and so that was something that we were really focused on, making sure that we were advocating to keep some of those kind of minor details within that bill there, and making sure that our community had access to some of these funds moving forward. So that was a huge priority for us. A number of other things kind of on that social issue. There was a banning of books across the state of North Dakota for public libraries and school libraries, so banning specific materials in those books. There was a movement to prohibit transgender athletes from participating in both K through 12 and collegiate sports. As well as there was some appetite to ban approval voting and ranked choice voting across the state of North Dakota. And for those that don't know, the city of Fargo, for their elections, they allow people to do approval voting, or it's approval voting system, and so folks can vote for all of that they approve of, which is a little bit different than ranked choice voting, where you're not actually ranking candidates, you're just approving of candidates. And what the state legislature was saying is we don't want to have any of those, either the ranked choice or the approval voting within our state. And that's something that's kind of our community overwhelmingly supported in Fargo.
And that was vetoed by the governor, but then overturned, am I right?
Yes, but then it wasn't sustained by the Senate.
So
it passed the House, but wasn't sustained by the Senate. So it was kind of weren't sure how that was going to end up at the end of session. But I know it was a huge priority for some of our local folks as well. So
well, that's great. That's a lot that happened during this packed legislative session, some that we were involved in, some we weren't, but we wanted to give kind of a high-level overview. Is there any other points before I wrap up, Cale, that you wanted to talk about in the other bucket, maybe?
Yeah, no, I think that there's so much that happens in the legislative session with, almost 1,000 bills. It was 989 bills introduced, and within a 4-month time span. I mean, that's a lot to go through, and the legislators even had, have sometimes have trouble going through all these bills just because it's so much in such a short amount of time. And so there's a number of things that I could mention, but for the sake of time, I would just say just keep checking out some of the resources that we have, some of the resources that the legislature has, and some of the resources that our partners have. I think that's also that's a huge part of this. Is it might not necessarily be a key priority for the chamber, but it might be for some of our partners, and they might have some more information.
Yeah, thank you for that. If our comms team didn't think we were fun already, man, this just made it. Just locked it down.
Yes.
We're a fun team, but no, we told them we'll just do a couple-minute update on what happened during session. But when you get us talking about some of this stuff, you can't leave out the details. So there's a lot of great stuff that happened this session. a lot going on. I have to give a big shout out to you, Kale. Thank you for all your work. As you can see, Kale's been a wealth of knowledge in this area and keeping our policy efforts moving. So want to publicly thank you for that. But a couple other thank yous to our members. I hope that you can see that this is the value of your membership at work right here. The advocacy work that we're doing every single day, both sides of the river and federally. It's really important stuff. A lot of the stuff that Kale and I talked about today impacts each of our businesses all across the region, all across the state. So it's something that we do behind the scenes sometimes that it's hard to give updates day to day just because things change so quickly. But we are here working for you and happy to chat further about the outcome of some of these things and what you'd like to see in the upcoming session. We'll be here working for you all the time on that and alongside you. Thank you to our members who are very involved in this. We hear from our legislators how important it is to see you as business members, you as community members out there talking to them either in person, virtually, through email, whatever it be, but being able to not just hear from us on some of these issues, but really how they'll impact you is so important. So engagement in the interim during the sessions really cannot overstate the importance of that. That is really key to moving some of these priorities forward. So many of you helped with a lot of these issues. You know who you are, so thank you. To our public policy sponsors, of course, we couldn't do this work without you, so thank you so much for your investment as well. And then lastly, to our legislators, we made it through another session, so thanks for working with us and all of our business and community members. They put in a ton of hours and effort, so thank your neighbors that are your legislators. It's a big job, and you'll be seeing more, like Kale said, come out from us as far as how your legislators voted on specific issues that we talked about today. A blog post that Kale wrote up with our comms team, so you'll be seeing a lot more information today. But this was kind of your overview of the North Dakota legislative session. We'll be coming at you with Minnesota when they wrap up, but for this year, that's it.
Good to go.
Nice job.